Good morning. It's March 28th, 2022. This is To My Liberal Friends, and I'm John Haddo. President Joe Biden has returned from Europe, where he went to meet with NATO allies and discuss Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is standard practice for any president and shows the flag when necessary. The administration had already had to withstand the criticism of Vice President Kamala Harris on her trip to Europe. We all remember her basic explanation of the geography of Europe and who was invading who. And I'm going to quote her, quote, "Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia decided to invade a smaller country called Ukraine. So basically, that's wrong," end quote. I'm sure the European leaders looked at each other and said, "What is this woman talking about?" Now, you would think that after that goofy comment, coupled with her nervous laughter at the most inopportune times, that Biden would look like a polished speaker when he got to Poland. We can all remember that during the campaign, Biden made the point over and over that, quote, "the words of a president matter. They can move markets. They can send our brave men and women to war. They can bring peace." Now, of course, he was criticizing Donald Trump for some of his inopportune comments. But Biden continues to show his age and make gaffe after gaffe, and forcing the White House staff to try and clean up his slips of the tongue. Biden suggested in his speech to members of the 82nd Airborne stationed in Poland that they would be fighting in Ukraine. He told them they would see women and children there and they would have a difficult time forgetting those images. His exact quote was, quote, "You're going to see when you're there, some of you have been there, you're going to see women, young people standing in the middle in front of a damn tank saying, 'I'm not leaving,' end quote." Now, I'm not sure when these troops were in Ukraine to see these things or when they're going, but it was another instance when he goes off script and just starts rambling. Of course, the White House staff had to immediately correct the record and state that U.S. troops would not be fighting the Russians in Ukraine. And of course, none of those 82nd Airborne troops had been there during the war. I wonder how they broke the news to President Biden that he needs to think a little bit more before he says something. Simply shooting from the hip causes some major problems because the people of the world, especially those in the Kremlin, listen to every word he says. Now, I also know that the troops are listening because I have a grandson with the 101st Airborne in Romania. But Biden continued. Later in another meeting, he looked directly at Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and said this war is why he wanted a former general as a Secretary of State. Now, of course, Austin is not the Secretary of State. Anthony Blinken holds that job. His exact quote was, again, "The general, Secretary of State, asked me if I would send over 12,000 troops. There are 100,000 American forces here now. We haven't had that in a long, long time because we are the organizing principle for the rest of the world. He said, you send the best available to America, and that's all of you," end quote. So I'm sure Secretary Austin was wondering when he got the dual rule. I think everyone knew what he meant, so the staff did not try to clear that one up. But things like that keep happening to Biden. And I would suggest this is partly because of his age. We need to remember that the president is pushing 80 years old, and we have all seen our grandparents make these kind of slips as they get older and more senile. But let's get to the major slip of the tongue. Speaking on the world stage about Russia's war in Ukraine, Biden said, quote, "For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power." This was a major error because you can be sure that the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin were listening intently to every word that President Biden uttered because they all have meaning. Putin has long suspected that Washington was working on a regime change, possibly through a revolution to orchestrate a civil society uprising to bring about his ouster. This must have sent the staff at the White House into a tizzy. While Biden did not realize how important a slip of this was, the staff certainly got it the minute it passed from his lips. Within hours, there was a correction from the White House that said, quote, "The president's point was that Putin cannot be allowed to exercise power over his neighbors or the region. He was not discussing Putin's power in Russia or regime change," end quote. Well, guess what? Everybody thought he was talking about a regime change. And I'm not saying he's wrong, but you just can't say that. But this only plays into Putin's hands as he attempts to characterize the war in Ukraine as one is defensive in nature, and he's only defending the motherland from aggression from the West. In a speech in Russia, Putin responded, quote, "Today they're trying to cancel a whole 1,000-year culture, our people. I'm talking about the gradual discrimination against everything linked to Russia. The last time such a mass campaign to destroy objectionable literature was carried out, it was by the Nazis in Germany almost 90 years ago." End quote. Putin loves to reference that he's fighting the Nazis again. But here he's referencing the cancellation of many Russian musical and artistic people since the start of his invasion. Putin's trying to rally the Russian people to a sense of national pride. And make no mistake, the Russians are a very proud people. Now, Putin then tried to justify these statements by comparing it to some criticism that author J.K. Rowling has seen for some comments she made on transgender issues. But Rowling quickly fought back with the following statement, and I quote, "Critiques of Western culture, cancel culture, are possibly not best made by those currently slaughtering civilians for the crime of resistance or who jail and poison their critics," end quote. Now, I don't think that Putin's going to try and respond to that reply, since he would have to keep saying they're not attacking civilians in Ukraine, despite the video and news reporting that show otherwise. But Biden continues to make these gaffes, and some of them are crucial. He ends up saying things the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, simply cannot say, even in error. He's been openly criticized by French President Emmanuel Macron, who has continued to try and keep a dialogue with Putin in an effort to end the war. Macron, on Sunday, in an interview, said, "We want to stop the war that Russia has launched in Ukraine without escalation. That's the objective." His main goal remained achieving first a ceasefire and then a total withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine through a diplomatic means. And that's what he wants to do, and he said we should not escalate things, neither with words nor actions. Now, I've long advocated a new rule be put in place, that once you hit the age of 75, you cannot run for president or Congress. This is an acknowledgement that as we age, we slow down both physically and mentally. Not all at the same rate, but we all do to a degree. Right now, we have a bunch of aging geriatrics running the nation, both in the White House and in the Congress, and that applies to both Republicans and Democrats. It's time to tell these old folks, retire and go home. That would apply to both Biden and to Donald Trump. This is to my liberal friends. Thanks for listening.